This is Tony T here from TonySpicks.com with our college football pick show here for Saturday, November 29th. We'll have every game on the board for you here on Saturday, all FBS games. For more free pick videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Lots of free picks on our channel for myself and our team of cappers here at TonySpicks.com, making a great channel to subscribe to. Hit us up with that like, that thumbs up. We greatly appreciate it. And then visit our site, TonySpicks.com. We're our multi-capper site showcasing top performers in our industry. Click the links of the hot cappers, get signed up to long-term passes. You see out there guys like Sean Higgs, Brian, DeAndre having great years up there. Justin's been red hot on the leaderboard. Kevin Thomas, Ron Crawford, Ramon, guys you know from our live shows. Let's print picks here on the page with best bets and more. We'll be locked and loaded here for this card here on Saturday. Remember, all of our one-day passes are profit guaranteed. They must turn a profit. Amount purchased is credit back to your account for site credits. That's profit guaranteed. And our promo code at TonyT at checkout knocks off that 15%. The link is in the description to get signed up. So let's go ahead. Let's get this one underway. Off here on Saturday, Houston fell to 8-3 after their 17-14 home defeats at TCU. The run game performed well, but the team was inefficient through the air. They gave up 280 in the game. They gave up 293 yards passing for 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Connor Wakeman in the game, 15-29 for 161 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 114 yards. Baylor drops to 5-6 with a 41-17 road defeat at Arizona. The Bears turned it over 3 times with struggles in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 172 yards rushing. Sawyer Robertson in the game, 22 of 33 passes for 162 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. Baylor 2-2 at home in conference play. The Cougars are 4-0 on the road in the Big 12, including an 8-point win at Arizona State. Houston's defense on the road allowing about 19 points per game with great work against the run and pass. Baylor at home in conference play allowing 199 yards rushing per game with 5.3 yards per rush. They are 3-6 to the spread at home when lying between -3 and +3. Pick here Houston +2.5. Ohio State and Michigan going off here on Saturday. Ohio State now 11-0 after a 42-9 home victory against Rutgers behind really a strong rushing performance. Julian Sayin here 13 of 19 for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. Michigan 9-1 after a 45-20 victory at Maryland. They gained 423 yards in the win behind a strong rushing performance. Bryce Underwood 16-23 passing for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns. Michigan's losses came against USC by 18 and Oklahoma by 11. The Buckeyes on the road throwing for 268 yards with 8.2 yards per pass attempt and defending well. Michigan home allowing 67% completion rate. The Buckeyes have covered 10 of 11. Pick here Ohio State -9.5. Kentucky and Louisville. This one for Saturday. Kentucky now 5-6 after a 45-17 road defeat at Vanderbilt. The Wildcats rushed for 31 yards and were inefficient in the passing game. They limited the Commodores on the ground but allowed 539 yards passing for 12.3 yards per pass attempt. Carter Bowling in the game, 26 of 44 for 280 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Louisville fell to 7-4 after a 38-6 road defeat at SMU. The Cardinals rushed for 4.4 yards a carry and were inefficient in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 485 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Miller Moss missed the game due to injury and was pointed to play here. Moss has completed 64% of his passes with 7 yards per pass attempt. The Cardinals have lost and failed to cover 3 straight with ineffectiveness in the passing game. The Wildcats offense the past month rushed for 4.1 yards a carry and getting good work at the quarterback position, plus defending the run well. Wildcats are 1 win away from bowl eligibility. Louisville also banged up at running back and receiver position. Pick here will be on Kentucky here +3.5. Toledo and Central Michigan going off on Saturday. We've got here at Toledo 7-4 after their 38-9 home victory against Ball State. The Rockets had movement in their passing game and rushed for 186 yards for 6.1 yards a carry. They limited the Cardinals' ground attack and allowed 206 yards passing for 6.4 yards per carry. Tucker Gleason in the game, 15-24 for 218 yards with 4 touchdowns and 2 picks. Central Michigan improved to 7-4 after a 28-16 road win at Kent State. The Chippewas were ineffective throwing the football, but rushed for 174 yards for 4 yards a carry. They held up Golden Flashes to 2.5 yards a carry with 185 yards passing for 6.6 yards per pass attempt. Joe Lavis, 11 of 20 for 121 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. CMU is 3-0 at home in the MAC. Toledo has lost 2 of 3 on the road in the MAC. The Rockets on the road in the MAC conference play put up 20 points per game with struggles throwing the football. The Chippewas at home put up 37 points per game with 5.1 yards per rush and great work in the passing game. They defend the run and pass well at home. CMU 4-0 the spread at home, and the Rockets 1-4 the spread on the road overall. Pick here Central Michigan here plus 10.5. Colorado and Kansas State going off here on Saturday. We got Colorado dropping to 3-8 after their 42-17 home defeat to Arizona State. The Bulls were ineffective in the passing game and rushed for 135 yards for 4.5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 580 yards to the Sun Devils with poor work against the run and pass. Julian Lewis here, 19 of 38 for 161 yards and a touchdown. Kansas State 3-6 with a 51-47 road defeat to Utah. The Wildcats were inefficient in the passing game but rushed for 472 yards for 11.2 yards per carry. On defense, they allowed 551 yards by poorly defending the run and pass. Avery Johnson here, 12 of 23 passing for 102 yards with a touchdown to pick. He rushed for 72 yards and a score. Kansas State 1 win away from bowl eligibility. The Buffs have lost and failed to cover 6 of 7. They lost and failed to cover every road game. Kansas State has won 2 of 3 at home in conference play. Colorado on the road is allowing 38 points and 439 yards per game with struggles on offense as well. Pick here Kansas State minus 17.5. Got Ball State and Miami, Ohio for Saturday. Ball State now 4-7 after their 38-9 road defeat at Toledo. The Cardinals had some movement through the air but rushed for 2.7 yards a carry and committed 3 turnovers. On defense, they allowed 8.1 yards per pass attempt with 186 yards rushing for 6.2 yards per carry. Kyle Kelly in the game, 13 of 30 passing for 166 yards with 2 interceptions. Miami, Ohio 5-5 with their 37-20 road win at Buffalo. The Redhawks rushed for 3.9 yards a carry and had movement in the passing game. They held the Bulls to 46 rushing yards with 303 yards passing for 6.6 yards a carry and forced 3 turnovers. Thomas Gotkowski here, 13 of 23 passing for 185 yards and a touchdown. Ball State has been held to 9 points or fewer in all 4 road games. The Redhawks are 1 win away from bowl eligibility. The Cardinals on the road allowing 5.5 yards per rush with 70% completion rate for 8.3 yards per pass attempt. Miami, Ohio is defending well at home. In conference play, the Redhawks 9-2 the spread at home. Pick here Miami, Ohio minus 17.5. Miami and Pittsburgh going off here on Saturday. We have Miami 9-2 after their 34-17 road win at Virginia Tech. The Hurricanes had a huge pass performance, but rushed for 83 yards for 2.8 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 395 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Carson Beck here, 27-32 for 320 yards with 4 touchdowns. Pittsburgh improved to 8-3 with a 42-28 road win at Georgia Tech. The Panthers gained 412 yards with good performance in the run and pass. They held the Yellow Jackets at 3.7 yards a carry with 257 yards passing for 6.3 yards per pass attempt. Mason Heinschel in the game, 20 of 27 for 226 yards and 2 touchdowns. Pittsburgh won and covered 5 out of 6. The Hurricanes have failed to cover their past 2 on the road. Miami on the road allowing 279 yards passing per game with 7.4 yards per pass attempt, and on offense rushed for 3.3 yards a carry. Pitt at home in the ACC are putting up 43 points per game with 338 yards passing for 8 yards per pass attempt. Pick here will be Pittsburgh plus 7. East Carolina and FAU. This one going off on Saturday. East Carolina 7-4 after a 58-24 home defeat at UTSA. The Pirates had movement in their passing game and rushed for 158 yards for 4.9 yards a carry and 3 turnovers. On defense, they allowed 558 yards by poorly defending the run and pass. Caton Hauser in the game, 18-32 passes for 241 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. FAU drops at 4-7 with a 48-45 home defeat to UConn. The Owls threw at high volume and rushed for 193 yards for 6 yards per carry. On defense, they allowed 600 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Caden Veldkamp, 42 of 55, passing for 494 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 2 touchdowns. Wind is in the early forecast here. FAU has covered 6 of 7 behind their passing game. ECU has allowed 450 yards rushing in their past 2 games with 465 yards through the air. The Owls 5-1 to the spread at home, facing a team that averages 2 or more turnovers per game. Pick here FAU +7. Iowa State and Oklahoma State. This one for Saturday. Iowa State now 7-4 after their 38-14 home victory against Kansas. The Jayhawks gained 462 yards with really good work in the pass and run game. On defense, they allowed 6.3 yards per rush with 191 yards passing for 6.6 yards per pass attempt. Rocco Becht, 18 of 23 passes for 241 yards and 2 touchdowns. Oklahoma State fell to 1-10 with a 17-14 road defeat to UCF. The Cowboys performed poorly in the passing game and rushed for 104 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 3.5 yards per rush with 271 yards passing for 10.8 yards per pass attempt. The Cowboys have gone under in 3 of 4 with improvement in stopping the run. The Cyclones have gone under in 4 of 5, and bad weather is in the forecast. The Cyclones have been running at high volume the past 2 games. Oklahoma State has averaged 14.4 points per game in their past 8 games with poor rushing and passing numbers. The Cyclones have been poor in the passing game on the road in the Big 12. Pick here will be Iowa State and Oklahoma State under 47.5. Texas Tech and West Virginia. This one for Saturday. Texas Tech here improved to 10-1 after a 48-9 home victory against UCF. The Red Raiders were gained at 499 yards with good performance in the run and pass. They limited the Knights to 52 rushing yards with 178 yards passing for 5.4 yards per pass attempt. Baron Morton in the game, 14 of 20 for 149 yards with a touchdown. West Virginia dropped to 4-7, a 25-23 home defeat to Arizona State. They had good movement through the air and rushed for 68 yards for 1.7 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Sun Devils on the ground and allowed 207 yards passing for 7.4 yards per pass attempt. Scotty Fox here, 19 of 31 for 353 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Mountaineers have covered 4 straight behind strong rush defense. Cold temperatures are forecasted. Texas Tech is hitting all data points on the road and on offense and defense positively. WVU, the past month, their pass for 253 yards per game with 8.3 yards per pass attempt and great run defense. They have covered 4 of 5 at home. Pick here West Virginia here +24. Clemson and South Carolina. This one for Saturday. We've got here Clemson 6-5 after their home win against FCS Furman, 45-10. But 2 weeks ago, it was a 20-19 road win at Louisville. The Tigers were inefficient through the air and rushed for 121 yards for 4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 10.7 yards per rush with 171 yards per pass, along with 171 yards rushing for 5.7 yards a carry. Cade Klubnik, 9 of 15 for 159 yards and 2 touchdowns. South Carolina now 4-7 after a 51-7 home victory against Coastal Carolina. The Gamecocks put up 579 yards with great work in the pass and run. On defense, they held the Chanticleers to 220 yards by defending the run and pass effectively. Norris Sellers hit 16 of 20 for 274 yards and 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 82 yards and 2 scores. South Carolina has lost 7 of 8 against major conference schools. The Tigers have won 3 straight. On the road, they're allowing 15.8 points per game as they allow 3.8 yards per rush and 6.1 yards per pass attempt. South Carolina at home allowing 65% completion rate. Clemson 3-1 to the spread on the road against losing teams. The Gamecocks are 1-3 the spread at home, facing teams that average 250 yards passing per game or greater. Pick here will be Clemson plus 2.5. UCF and BYU, this one for Saturday. UCF now 5-6 after their 17-14 home victory against Oklahoma State. The Knights had good movement in the passing game and rushed for 125 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Cowboys to 228 yards with 3.5 yards per rush and 4.4 yards per pass attempt. Tavon Jackson here, 16-25 for 271 yards and 2 touchdowns with 2 picks in the game. BYU now 10-1 after a 26-14 road win at Cincinnati. The Cougars were inefficient in the passing game but rushed for 265 yards for 5.4 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Bearcats to 3.8 yards per run with 300 passing yards for 7.9 yards per pass attempt. Bear Bachmeier, 15-25 passing for 127 yards. He rushed for 46 yards and a score. BYU's lone loss came at Texas Tech by 22. The run defense has been exceptional the past 3 games. UCF has struggled offensively in conference play. They averaged 10.8 points per game on the road. Defensively on the road in conference, the Knights allowing 5.3 yards per carry with 69% completion rate for 7.4 yards per pass attempt. BYU at home in the Big 12 putting up 35 points per game with 4.3 yards per carry and good play at quarterback. Defensively in the Big 12 at home, they limit teams on the ground and allow 52% completion rate. UCF 0-4 the spread over their past 4 games. The Cougars 4-1 the spread in their past 5 at home. Pick here BYU minus 17.5. FIU and Sam Houston, this one going off on Saturday. FIU now 6-5 after a 27-21 home victory against Jacksonville State. The Panthers had movement in the passing game and rushed for 202 yards for 4.9 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 6.5 yards per pass attempt with 251 yards passing for 5.5 yards per carry. Joe Pazanski here looked like he's a takeover of Keon Jenkins. He got them to bullet ability here. Pazanski here. He completed 14-28 for 196 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Sam Houston State dropped to 2-9 after a 31-17 road defeat at Middle Tennessee State. Bearcats had good movement through the air and rushed for 79 yards for 3.3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 460 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Landon Locke in the game, 25 of 40 for 281 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Sam Houston State at home in conference play, rushing for 4.4 yards a carry and putting up 23 points per game. FIU has 3 losses in conference play. The pick here will be Sam Houston plus 10. UTEP and Delaware going off on Saturday. UTEP now 2-9 after a 34-31 home defeat to New Mexico State. The Miners were inefficient in the passing game and rushed for 248 yards for 7.3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 470 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Skylar Locke there, 16 of 30 for 151 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Delaware 5-6 with a 52-14 road defeat at Wake Forest. The Blue Hens were inefficient in the passing game and rushed for 67 yards for 2.3 yards per carry. On defense, they allowed 577 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Nick Minasucci here, 21 of 30 for 140 yards with a touchdown. UTEP has lost 7 of 8. Delaware at home passed for 300 yards per game and holding opposing quarterbacks to 6.7 yards per pass attempt. UTEP on the road in Conference USA allowing 241 yards passing for 6.8 yards per pass attempt. They are inefficient in the passing game on the road in conference. For the win, the Blue Hens are 6-6 and will be what we call a backup bowl eligibility since it is first year there, since they're not eligible to be a bowl team unless there aren't enough 6-6 teams. The pick here will be Delaware at -5. Georgia Southern and Marshall going off on Saturday. Georgia Southern drops to 5-6 after a 45-10 home defeat to Old Dominion. The Eagles were inefficient through the air and rushed for 49 yards for 2.6 yards a carry. J.C. French 16-24 for 147 yards with a pick. Marshall fell to 5-6 with a 26-24 road defeat to Appalachian State. The Thundering Herd had movement in their passing game and rushed for 238 yards for 6 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Mountaineers to 3.3 yards per carry with 135 yards passing for 4.9 yards per pass attempt. Carlos Del Rio Wilson 13 of 21 passing for 146 yards and a pick. He rushed for 71 yards and 2 scores. The Eagles 1-2 on the road in the Sun Belt. Marshall 2-1 at home in conference play. The Eagles on the road in conference play, allowing 5.7 yards per rush with 237 yards passing. They struggled on the ground on the road in the Sun Belt. Marshall has put up good offensive numbers at home in conference play, but defensively allowing 327 yards passing per game with 10.9 yards per pass attempt. The Eagles 3-1 the spread on the road as an underdog of 3.5 to 10 points. Pick here will be Georgia Southern plus 9.5. Louisiana Tech and Missouri State going off here on Saturday. We got Louisiana Tech here 6-5 after a 34-28 home victory against Liberty. The Flames were inefficient in the passing game, but rushed for 319 yards for 5.9 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Flames' passing attack and allowed 283 yards rushing for 6.4 yards a carry. Trey Kukok, 13 of 20 for 118 yards. He rushed for 143 yards and 2 scores. Missouri State drops to 7-4. It's a 41-34 road defeat to Kennesaw State. The Bears put up 535 yards with good work in the run and pass. On defense, they held the Owls to 3.9 yards per carry with 387 yards passing for 11.4 yards per pass attempt. Jacob Clark here, 23 of 32 for 344 yards with 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. The Bears have won 5 of 6. The Bulldogs have dropped 4 of 6. Louisiana Tech on the road in conference play rushed for 3.1 yards a carry with poor work in the passing game. Missouri State at home in Conference USA running for 4.8 yards a carry with 7.1 yards per pass attempt. They defend the pass well at home in conference play. The Bears 3-0 to the spread as home favorite. Pick here will be Missouri State here at minus the 2.5. Oh yeah, Georgia State and Old Dominion here for Saturday. Georgia State is 1-10 after their 31-19 here road defeat here to Troy. The Panthers in the game gained 516 yards with good work in the run and passing game. On defense, they limited the Trojans to 1.9 yards per carry with 261 yards passing for 8.4 yards per pass attempt. Christian Verlo, 19 of 38 passing for 307 yards with a touchdown and a pick. Old Dominion now 8-3 after a 45-10 road win at Georgia Southern. The Monarchs had movement in their passing game and rushed for 375 yards for 6.6 yards per pass attempt. They limited the Eagles to 249 yards by defending the run and pass well. Colton Joseph here, 12 of 18, passed for 140 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 189 yards and a score. ODU has gone under in 6 of 8. We had really good defensive play. The Panthers have gone under in 2 straight, and that's on the road as they've struggled here with quarterback efficiency. ODU at home limiting opponents to 8 points per game with strong play against the run and pass. Pick here will be on Georgia State and Old Dominion to go under 58.5. All right, we got Western Kentucky and Jacksonville State. This one going off here on Saturday. All right, we got Western Kentucky here falling to 8-3 after a 13-10 road defeat at LSU. The Hilltoppers were held 152 yards with really poor work in the run and pass. They allowed 3.4 yards per rush in the game with 202 yards passing for 8.1 yards per pass attempt. Rodney Tisdale in the game, 20 of 39 for 128 yards with 2 interceptions. Jacksonville State fell to 7-4. It is a 27-21 home defeat against FIU. They held movement. They had movement in the passing game and rushed for 251 yards for 5.5 yards a carry in the game. Caden Creel, 17 of 30 passing for 190 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 100 yards. Gamecocks 3-0 at home in Conference USA. WKU is 3-0 on the road in conference with all wins by 5 or fewer points. WKU on the road allowing 4.2 yards per rush with 285 yards passing. They throw the ball well on the road in Conference USA. The Gamecocks at home rush for 6.2 yards a carry with struggles to defend the pass. The Gamecocks 3-1 to the over at home. Pick here will be on Western Kentucky and Jacksonville State over 55.5. Arkansas State and Appalachian State. This one going off here on Saturday. Arkansas State fell to 5-6 after their 34-30 home defeat to Louisiana. The Red Wolves were inefficient through the air and rushed for 138 yards for 3.9 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Raging Cajuns through the air and allowed 202 yards rush for 4.4 yards a carry. Jalen Rayner in the game, 25 of 43 passing for 256 yards. He rushed for 54 yards. App State 5-6 after a 26-24 home victory against Marshall. The Mountaineers were ineffective through the air and rushed for 142 yards for 3.3 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Thundering Herd through the air and allowed 238 yards rushing for 6 yards per run. J.J. Cole in the game, 19-27 for 134 yards and a touchdown. Winner becomes bowl eligible. App State 1-2 at home in the Sun Belt. Arkansas State 2-1 on the road in conference play. Arkansas State's offense on the road in conference play has been poor here, just 2.4 yards per rush and inefficient quarterback play. App State at home in the Sun Belt getting accurate play at quarterback. App State 3-0 the spread at home when lying between +3 and -3. We'll take your App State here minus the 2.5. South Alabama and Texas State going off here on Saturday. South Alabama 4-7 after a 42-35 home victory against Southern Miss. The Jaguars had movement in their passing game and rushed for 263 yards for 5.1 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Golden Eagles to 41 rushing yards with 400 yards rushing for 7.7 yards per pass attempt. Bishop Davenport 20 of 23 for 151 yards. He rushed for 2 scores. Texas State 5-6. It is a 31-14 home victory against UL Monroe. The Bobcats had movement in throwing the football and rushed for 221 yards for 5.1 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Warhawks to 3.8 yards per rush with 166 yards passing for 6.4 yards per pass attempt. Brad Jackson in the game at 25 of 32 for 200 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 88 yards and 2 scores. Texas State 1 win away from bowl eligibility. They have won 2 straight, all by 17 or greater points. South Alabama 2-1 on the road here in conference play with wins at UL Monroe and Georgia State. Texas State is a step up in class here over these 2 down Sun Belt teams. The Bobcats at home put up 34 points per game with 5 yards per rush and great work at quarterback. South Alabama's defense on the road in conference play allowing 4.6 yards per rush with 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Pick here will be on Texas State minus 9. Middle Tennessee State and New Mexico going off here on Saturday. Middle Tennessee State now 2-9 after a 31-17 home victory against Sam Houston State. The Blue Raiders had good movement in the passing game and rushed for 192 yards for 6 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Bearcats to 3.1 yards per rush with 281 yards passing for 6.9 yards per pass attempt. Roman Gagliano, who steps in pretty nicely here for an injury, Tatiano here. He went 21-34 for 268 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 67 yards and 2 scores. Mexico State 4-7 after a 34-31 home victory against UTEP. The Aggies moved the ball through the air and rushed for 194 yards for 5 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Miners' passing game but allowed 248 yards rushing for 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Adam DeMonte here, 29-41 for 253 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. MTSU 0-3 on the road in Conference USA. The Blue Raiders on defense on the road in conference, allowing 5.1 yards per rush with 276 yards passing for 7.9 yards per pass attempt, but have really put up good numbers offensively. New Mexico State at home in Conference USA has really struggled on the ground and has not been as efficient at quarterback. The pick here will be Middle Tennessee State here at +4. UAB and Tulsa going off here on Saturday. We've got here UAB falling here to 3-8 after a 48-18 home defeat to USF. The Blazers had some movement in their passing game and rushed for 131 yards for 3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 544 yards of really poor work against the run and pass. Jalen Kitna 20 of 36 for 230 yards with 3 picks. Tulsa now 4-7 after a 26-25 road win at Army. The Golden Hurricane gained 497 yards with good work in the run and passing game. They limited the Black Knights through the air and allowed 247 yards rushing for 4.5 yards a carry. Baylor Hayes here, 20 of 31 for 267 yards and a touchdown. Tulsa's won 2 straight and have covered 4 of 5. They have a road win at Oklahoma State. The Blazers have lost and failed to cover 4 straight. The defense has been bad the past 2 games. UAB on the road in the AAC allowing 4.5 yards per rush with 10.3 yards per pass attempt. At home, the Golden Hurricane averaging 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Pick here will be on Tulsa minus 8.5. Boston College and Syracuse. This one going off here on Saturday. All right, here we've got Boston College at 1-10 after a 36-34 home defeat to Georgia Tech. The Eagles gained 537 yards with good work in the run and pass. On defense, they allowed 628 yards by poorly defending the run and pass. Dylan Lundgren, 26 of 40 for 262 yards with 2 touchdowns. Syracuse dropped into 3-9. It was a 70-7 road defeat at Notre Dame. The Orange really poor in the passing game and rushed for 112 yards for 2.2 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the fighting Irish to the air and allowed 329 yards rushing for 13.7 yards per rush. Joseph Velarde here, 14 of 27 for 83 yards and 3 picks. Syracuse has lost 7 straight as they struggled offensively since losing starting quarterback Steve Angeli. BC's done a better job throwing the football over the past 4 weeks. Syracuse at home in the ACC averaging 8.7 points per game while surrendering 32 as they're giving up 4.6 yards per rush and 8.8 yards per pass attempt. The Eagles have covered 3 of 4. We'll take Boston College here, minus 3. UL Monroe and Louisiana. This one for Saturday. Monroe fell to 3-8 after a 31-14 road defeat at Texas State. The Warhawks had some movement through the air and rushed for 134 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 6.5 yards per pass attempt with 221 yards rushing for 5.1 yards per rush. Aiden Armenta in the game, 19 of 26 for 166 yards. He rushed for 20 yards and a score. Louisiana now 5-6 as after their 34-30 road win at Arkansas State. The Raging Cajuns were limited in the passing game and rushed for 202 yards for 4.4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 5.9 yards per run with 138 yards rushing for 3.9 yards per carry. Lunch Winfield in the game, 18-25 for 147 yards. He rushed for 89 yards and 2 scores. Louisiana is 1 win away from bowl eligibility. They've won and covered 3 straight. The Warhawks have lost 7 straight, failing to cover 6 of those games. They're averaging just 14 points per game on the road in the Sun Belt and getting outscored by 20. Louisiana at home in the Sun Belt put up 35 points per game with 4.7 yards per rush. We'll take Louisiana here at minus the 9.5. Missouri and Arkansas going off here on Saturday. Missouri fell to 7-4 after their 17-6 road defeat at Oklahoma. The Tigers had some movement in their passing game and rushed for 70 yards for 2 yards per carry. On defense, they limited the Sooners to 286 yards with good work against the run and pass. Bo Perbilla here 20 of 36 for 231 yards and 2 picks. Arkansas is 2-9 after a 52-27 road defeat here to Texas. The Razorbacks had movement in their passing game and rushed for 180 yards for 6 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Longhorns on the ground, but gave up 393 yards passing for 12.7 yards per pass attempt. Kalen Green, 10 of 20 for 118 yards and a pick. He rushed 56 yards and a score. It is 9 straight losses for the Razorbacks. Missouri 1-2 on the road in the SEC. Missouri's offense on the road in the SEC averaging 13 points per game with poor work in the run and passing game. They defended well on the road in conference. South Carolina put up 34 points per game at home in SEC competition with 4.6 yards per rush and 8.4 yards per pass attempt, but defends poorly. No home wins for Gamecocks at home in conference play. Pick here Missouri minus 2.5. Wisconsin and Minnesota. This one going off on Saturday. We've got Wisconsin now 4-7. This is after a 27-10 home victory against Illinois. The Badgers were limited through the air and rushed for 209 yards for 4.8 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Fighting Illini here to 50 rushing yards with 248 yards passing for 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Carter Smith goes 9 of 11 for 75 yards. Minnesota fell to 6-5. It is a 38-35 road defeat at Northwestern. Missing a field goal that could have forced it to overtime there. The Golden Gophers had movement from their passing game and rushed for 59 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 525 yards, really by poorly defending the run and pass. Drake Lindsey, 20 of 30 for 264 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, snow and cold weather are forecasted here with light winds. Minnesota is 4-0 at home in the Big Ten. Wisconsin 0-4 on the road with all losses to Power Conference schools. The Badgers on the road average just 9.5 points per game with poorly defending the run and pass. Poor rushing and pass offense here on the road. Minnesota defends well at home, allowing 3.3 yards per rush with 6.5 yards per pass attempt and getting good play at quarterback. Pick here in Minnesota -1. Wake Forest and Duke. This one going off on Saturday. Wake Forest now 8-3 after their 52-14 home victory against Delaware. The Demon Deacons gained 577 yards with great work in the run and pass. On defense, they held the Blue Hens to 2.3 yards a carry with 233 yards passing for 4.9 yards per pass attempt. Robbie Ashford here, 15-22 for 292 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 64 yards and scored. Duke sits at 6-5 after a 32-25 road win at North Carolina. The Blue Devils were inefficient in the passing game and rushed for 117 yards for 5.3 yards a carry. On defense, they held up Tar Heels to 4 yards per rush with 204 yards passing for 9.7 yards per pass attempt. Gary Mensah here, 20 of 33 for 175 yards and a touchdown. Duke 1-2 at home in the ACC. The Demon Deacons 2-1 on the road in conference play. Demon Deacons offense has struggled on the road in conference with 2.8 yards per rush and poor quarterback play. They allowed 155 yards rushing for 4.4 yards per carry on the road, and that's in conference play as well. Duke at home has thrown for 285 yards with 8 yards per pass attempt here. We're going to take Duke here at -1. LSU and Oklahoma. This one for Saturday. We got LSU now 7-4 after a 13-10 home victory to Western Kentucky. The Tigers gained 328 yards with poor work in the run and pass. On defense, they limited the Hilltoppers to 22 rushing yards with 130 passing yards for 3.2 yards a carry. Michael Van Buren here, 25 of 42 for 202 yards with a touchdown and a pick. Oklahoma sits at 9-2. A 17-6 home victory against Missouri. The Sooners were limited through the air and rushed for 103 yards for 3.2 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Tigers to 2 yards per rush with 231 yards passing for 6.4 yards per carry. John Mateer here, 14 of 30 for 173 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 60 yards. Backup quarterback for LSU is a concern here. Oklahoma run defense has been outstanding against the SEC. Rain is in the forecast as well as wind. The Sooners 9-2 this season. LSU's gone under in 3 straight. Pick here will be LSU and Oklahoma under 36.5. It's Troy and Southern Miss going off on Saturday. We have Troy now 7-4 after their 31-19 home victory against Georgia State. The Trojans had good movement in the passing game with 62 yards rushing for just 1.9 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush with 364 yards passed for 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Bruce Crowder here, 27 of 43 for 361 yards with 4 touchdowns. Southern Miss 7-4 with a 42-35 road defeat at South Alabama. The Golden Eagles had good movement in the passing game and rushed for 41 yards for under 2 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 7.2 yards per pass attempt with 260 yards rushing for 5.1 yards per pass attempt. Braylon Braxton here, 31 of 52 for 400 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. Southern Miss has dropped 2 straight behind poor defensive performance in the run and pass and failed to cover 3 straight. They have been torched here on the ground for their past 5 games. The Trojans are getting good performance at quarterback on the road. They are 4-1 with the spread away from home. We'll take Troy here plus the 7. Penn State and Rutgers going off here on Saturday. We have Penn State now 5-6 after their 37-10 home victory against Nebraska. The Lions gained 412 yards with good work in the run and pass. On defense, they limited the Cornhuskers' passing attack and allowed 131 yards rushing for 4.1 yards a carry. Ethan Grunkemeyer, 11 of 12 for 181 yards with a touchdown. Rutgers fell to 5-6 after a 42-9 home defeat to Ohio State. The Scarlet Knights gained 147 yards with poor work in the run and pass. On defense, they allowed 8 yards per pass attempt with 254 yards rushed for 6.7 yards per pass attempt. Anthony Kakmanis here, 10 of 20 for 81 yards. Winner becomes bowl eligible. Penn State on the road has struggled with quarterback efficiency. The defense on the road allowing 5.7 yards per rush with 71% completion rate. Rutgers at home in the Big Ten averaging 7.3 yards per pass attempt and 24 points a game. Pick here will be Rutgers plus the 13.5. Cincinnati and TCU going off on Saturday. Cincinnati fell to 7-4 after their 26-14 home defeat to BYU. The Bearcats had movement in their passing game, but rushed for 87 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Cougars' passing attack and allowed 265 yards rushing for 5.4 yards per carry. Brendan Sorsby in the game, 25 of 38 for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns and a pick. TCU now 7-4, a 17-14 home victory against Houston. The Orange Frogs had good movement in their passing game with 133 yards rushing for 3.7 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Cougars' passing attack and allowed 230 yards rushing for 5.8 yards a carry. Josh Hoover here, 24 of 33 for 293 yards with 2 touchdowns and 3 picks. Horned Frogs 2-1 at home in the conference. The Bearcats are 2-1 on the road in conference play, but they've lost 3 straight. Cincinnati's defense on the road allowing 5.3 yards per rush with 10.3 yards per pass attempt. Horned Frogs at home throwing for 313 yards with 8.4 yards per pass attempt. Bearcats have failed to cover 3 straight. Pick here TCU minus the 3.5. Oregon and Washington, this one going off on Saturday. We have Oregon now 10-1 after their 42-27 home victory against USC. The Ducks had good movement in their passing game and rushed for 179 yards for 4.4 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Trojans to 52 rushing yards with 330 yards passing for 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Dante Moore here, 22 of 30 for 257 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Washington now 8-3 after a 48-14 road win at UCLA. The Huskies moved the football through the air and rushed for 212 yards for 5.4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 207 yards with good work against the run and pass. Devin Williams, 17-26 for 213 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 56 yards and 2 scores. Washington 3-1 at home in conference play with a loss by 18 to Ohio State. The Ducks are 4-0 on the road in the Big Ten. They got past Iowa by 2 in the previous road game. Washington at home in conference play rushed for 4.7 yards a carry. Getting great play at the quarterback position. They defend well at home in the Big Ten. Pick here Washington here plus the 6.5. On Saturday, all right, we've got Kennesaw State now 8-3 after their 41-34 home victory against Missouri State. The Owls had a strong passing performance and rushed for 113 yards for 2.5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 535 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Mari Odom completed 24 of 34 for 387 yards with 5 touchdowns. He rushed for 32 yards and a score. Liberty fell to 4-7 after a 34-28 home defeat to Louisiana Tech. The Flames are limited through the air and rushed for 283 yards with 6.4 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Bulldogs through the air but allowed 319 yards rushing for 5.9 yards a carry. 3 straight losses for the Flames and missed covers. Kennesaw State here has won 7 of 8, covering 6 of those games. The Owls on the road in Conference USA put up 32 points per game with 4.9 yards per rush and great work in the passing game. Liberty has struggled at home in conference with pass defense. Pick here Kennesaw State here -2. Army and UTSA going off on Saturday. We got Army here 5-5 after a 26-25 home defeat to Tulsa. The Black Knights were limited through the air and rushed for 247 yards for 4.5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 497 yards by poorly defending the run and pass. Cale Hellum's in the game, 6 of 10 for 64 yards and a pick. He rushed for 159 yards and 3 scores. UTSA now 6-5 after their 58-24 home victory against East Carolina. The Roadrunners had good movement through the air and rushed for 210 yards for 5.4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 4.5, nearly 5 yards a carry, with 243 yards passing for 7.4 yards per pass attempt. Owen McGowan in the game, 24 of 33 for 248 yards with 5 touchdowns. UTSA 3-0 at home in conference. Army 2-2 on the road in conference play. Army defensively on the road in the AAC is putting up 18 points per game and defending the pass poorly. Roadrunners at home in conference averaging 56 points per game with 4.9 yards per rush and outstanding work in the passing game. Roadrunners 10-1 to the spread at home. In conference play, the pick here UTSA -7.5. Vanderbilt and Tennessee going off here on Thursday. We have Vanderbilt now 9-2 after a 45-17 home victory against Kentucky. The Commodores had a huge passing game, but rushed for 65 yards for 2.6 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 31 rushing yards with 284 yards passing for 5.8 yards per pass attempt. Diego Pavia here, 33 of 39 passing for 484 yards with 5 touchdowns and 1 pick. He rushed for 48 yards and a score. Tennessee 8-3 after a 31-11 road win at Florida. The Volunteers gained 452 yards with good work in the run and pass. On defense, they allowed 5 yards per rush with 116 yards passing for 6.8 yards per pass attempt. Joey Aguilar, 17 of 22 for 204 yards and a touchdown. Tennessee 1-2 at home in the SEC. Vanderbilt 1-2 on the road in conference play. The Commodores on the road in conference is getting good play at quarterback, but defending the pass poorly. Tennessee at home has similar profiles with good quarterback play and bad pass defense. The Commodores are 3-0 to the over in their past 3 games. The Vols have gone over in 4 of 6 at home. Pick here Vanderbilt and Tennessee over 65.5. James Madison and Coastal Carolina, this one for Saturday. James Madison now 10-1 after a 24-20 home victory against Washington State. The Dukes had light movement in the passing game and rushed for 175 yards for 5.5 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Cougars to 3.5 yards per rush with 171 yards passing for 5.5 yards per pass attempt. Lonzo Barnett here, 9 of 18 for 144 yards with a touchdown and a pick. Coastal Carolina sits at 6-5, a 51-7 road defeat at South Carolina. The Chanticleers gained 230 yards with poor work in the run and pass. On defense, they surrendered 579 yards by poorly defending the run and pass. Had Hudson in the game, 27 of 36, 474 yards. Coastal Carolina at home in conference play, 3-0 against the Sun Belt. JMU 3-0 on the road in conference play. James Madison on the road outscoring teams by 17 points per game in conference. Now the Chanticleers at home in the Sun Belt have put up 36 points a game, 5.7 yards per rush. They defend well at home against the Sun Belt. The Dukes have failed to cover 2 of 3 on the road in conference play. We'll take Coastal Carolina here plus 21.5. Florida and Florida State going off on Saturday. Florida State 5-6 after their 21-11 home defeat to NC State. The Seminoles had movement in their passing game and rushed for 180 yards for 5.3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 3.2 yards per rush with 152 yards passing for 5.8 yards per pass attempt. Tommy Castellanos here, 16 of 32 for 203 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. He rushed for 76 yards in the game. Florida's dropping to 3-8, a 31-11 home defeat to Tennessee. The Gators had slight movement through the air and rushed for 145 yards for 4.8 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 452 yards with poor play in the run and pass. DJ Lagway, 11 of 17 for 116 yards and a touchdown. Florida State is a win away from bowl eligibility. The Gators have lost 4 straight, poorly defending the run. Florida State has had success on the ground the past 2 games. Their run defense has been good for much of the season. Pick your Florida State at a pick 'em. Oregon State and Washington State going off on Saturday. We got Oregon State now 2-9 after a 31-14 road defeat to Tulsa. The Beavers rushed for just 2 yards a carry and had movement in the passing game. They allowed 446 yards in the game with poor work against the run and pass. Washington State 5-6 after a 24-20 road defeat at James Madison. The Cougars gained 301 yards, delivering poor results in the run and pass. They allowed 5 yards per rush with 144 yards passing for 8 yards per pass attempt. Zevi Eckhoff, 19-31 for 171 yards with a touchdown and a pick. Washington State is 1 win away from bowl eligibility. The Beavers won their first meeting at home 10-7 against the Cougars, but Oregon State is 0-4 on the road. They're rushed for just 2.2 yards a carry there away from home with inaccurate play at quarterback and bad defensive play. Washington State has defended well at home, holding teams to 18 points per game. The Beavers 0-4 the spread on the road. We'll take Washington State here minus 13.5. Virginia Tech and Virginia going off here on Saturday. Virginia Tech fell to 3-8 after their 34-17 home defeat to Miami. The Hokies had movement from their passing game and rushed for 194 yards for 5.2 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Hurricanes on the ground, but allowed 335 yards passing for 10 yards per pass attempt. Tyrone Drones in the game, 12 of 21 for 124 yards. Virginia now 9-2 after their 34-17 home victory against Duke. The Cavs gained 540 yards with effective running and passing. On defense, they held the Blue Devils to 1.9 yards per rush with 213 yards passing for 6 yards per pass attempt. Chandler Morris in the game, 23 of 35 for 316 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. They win by Virginia, and they play in the ACC championship game next week. The Cavs are 2-1 at home in conference play with a loss to Wake Forest. Virginia Tech 1-2 on the road in the ACC. Virginia Tech offensively on the road in conference, rushing for 6.3 yards a carry, but poor on the defensive side of the football against the run and pass. Virginia at home in conference play, running and throwing effectively. But their issue at home in the ACC is defending the pass, giving up 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Virginia 0-2 the spread at home when favored by 3.5 to 10 points. We'll take Virginia Tech here at plus 9.5. Rice and South Florida going off on Saturday. Rice 5-6 after a 56-24 home defeat at North Texas. The Owls were limited through the air and rushed for 296 yards for 5.6 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 540 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Chase Jenkins, 14 of 21 for 101 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 75 yards and a score. USF now 8-3 after a 48-18 road win at UAB. The Bulls gained 544 yards with good work in the run and passing game. On defense, they allowed 3 yards per rush with 251 yards passing for 6.3 yards per pass attempt. Byron Brown in the game, 19 of 25 for 253 yards with 3 touchdowns. He rushed for 62 yards and 2 scores. Rice 1-2 on the road in the AAC. USF 3-0 at home in conference play. Rice on the road in conference has struggled at quarterback and defensively, allowing 4.9 yards per rush with 8.3 yards per pass attempt. USF at home in conference, averaging 48 points per game with 6.2 yards per run and outstanding play at the quarterback position. They defend the run and pass well at home against the conference. USF has covered all 5 at home. Pick here USF here at minus 28. Maryland and Michigan State. This one here for Saturday. We got Maryland falling to 4-7 after their 45-20 home defeat to Michigan. Terrapins had movement in the passing game and rushed for 71 yards for 2.8 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 443 yards by poorly defending the run and pass. Malik Washington, 19 of 39 for 210 yards with a touchdown and a pick. Michigan State drops to 3-8 after their 20-17 road defeat at Iowa. Spartans had some movement here through the air and rushed for 80 yards for 2.9 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 3.9 yards per rush with 147 yards passing for 6.7 yards per pass attempt. Alessio Molavasic, he goes 25 of 42 for 255 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Game will be played at Ford Field in Detroit, so whether or not a factor. Michigan State has lost 8 straight and Maryland 7 straight defeats. Terrapins have a road win at Wisconsin and dropped a 3-point road decision at UCLA, covering both games. Spartans 0-3 at home in the SEC. The Terrapins' defense on the road in conference play allowing 31 points per game with poor work against a run and pass. Spartans are allowing 33 points per game in the Big Ten as they allow 5 yards per rush with 67% completion rate for 7.8 yards per pass attempt. The game will be played at a fast-playing surface here indoors. Pick here Maryland and Michigan State over 49.5. Northwestern and Illinois going off on Saturday. We have Northwestern now 6-5 after a 38-35 victory at Wrigley Field against Minnesota. The Wildcats gained 525 yards with good work in the run and passing game. On defense, they allowed 59 yards rushing for 264 yards passing for 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Preston Stone here 25 of 30 for 305 yards with 2 touchdowns. Illinois now 7-4 with their 27-10 road defeat to Wisconsin. The Fighting Illini rushed for 50 yards with good work in the passing game. They limited the Badgers through the air and allowed 209 yards rushing for 4.8 yards a carry. Luke Altmaier in the game, 21-35 for 248 yards. He had a rushing touchdown. Illinois here, 3-1 at home in the Big Ten. Wildcats 1-2 on the road in conference with losses by 7 at Nebraska and 21 at USC. Their pass offense and defense has struggled on the road in conference and surrendering 4.7 yards per rush. Illinois at home has defended the run and pass well and getting good work at quarterback. Fighting Illini 5-1 of the spread at home. We'll take Illinois here -7. Alabama and Auburn for Saturday. Alabama 9-2 after their 56-0 home victory against FCS Eastern Illinois. 2 weeks ago, it was a 23-21 home defeat to Oklahoma. The Crimson Tide had movement through the air and rushed for 80 yards for 2.4 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Sooners' ground attack and allowed 138 yards passing for 6 yards per pass attempt. Ty Simpson in the game, 11 of 16 for 147 yards with 2 interceptions. Auburn sits at 5-6 with a 62-17 home victory against FCS Mercer. 3 weeks ago, it was a 45-38 road defeat at Vanderbilt. The Tigers gained 563 yards with good work in the run and pass. On defense, they allowed 4.6 yards per rush with 337 yards passing for 11.4 yards per pass attempt. Ashton Daniel in the game, 31 of 44 for 353 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 89 yards and 2 scores. Alabama has struggled running the football in their SEC games against Auburn, and Auburn has good recent rushing performances and run defense. Both teams stopping the run. The ball most likely will be in the air here. Alabama on the road in the SEC is throwing for 244 yards a game. The Tigers pass offense at home in conference play here. It's been poor. They are averaging 10 points per game at home against the SEC. Auburn is 1-5. They're spread at home. We're going to go ahead and lay it here with Alabama -5.5. It's Charlotte and Tulane going off here on Saturday. Charlotte 1-10 after a 35-3 road defeat in Georgia. The 49ers gained 169 yards with poor work in the run and pass. On defense, they allowed 521 yards by poorly defending the run and passing game. Grayson Loftus, 14 of 27 for 130 yards with 2 picks. Tulane now 9-2 after their 37-13 road win in Temple. The Green Wave had good movement in the passing game and rushed for 175 yards or 4.5 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Owls at 204 yards with good work in the run and passing game. Jeff Ratzlaff here, 17 of 28 for 231 yards and 2 touchdowns. Green Wave has defended the run well the past 7 games. Charlotte has averaged 5 points per game over their past 2. They're allowing 41 points per game on the road in the AAC. At home, the Green Wave throwing for 283 yards for 9.2 yards per pass attempt. Shard has failed to cover 5-7 AAC play. We'll take Tulane here minus 30. North Carolina and NC State. This one for Saturday. North Carolina now 4-7 after a 32-25 home defeat against Duke. The Blue Devils had movement in their passing game and rushed for 101 yards for 4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 5.3 yards per pass attempt with 177 yards rushing for 4.1 yards a carry. Gio Lopez, 21-27 for 204 yards with a touchdown. He had a rushing score. NC State now 6-5 after a 21-11 home victory against Florida State. The Wolfpack had a poor passing performance, rushed for 134 yards for 3.2 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 6.3 yards per pass attempt with 180 yards of rushing for 5.3 yards a carry. CJ Baylor here, 18-25, 452 yards with 2 touchdowns. NC State offense has performed poorly in the past 2 games. North Carolina has shown some improvement in the back half of the season. The Wolfpack 4-8 to the spread as a road favorite. We'll take North Carolina here plus 7. UCLA and USC going off here on Saturday. UCLA fell here to 3-8 with their 48-14 home defeat to Washington. The Bruins were ineffective in the passing game and rushed for 57 yards for 2.6 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 7.6 yards per pass attempt with 212 yards rushing for 5.4 yards a carry. Nico Iamaleava here, 16-26 for 69 yards. USC fell to 8-3 with their 42-27 road defeat in Oregon. The Trojans had good movement through the air and rushed for 52 yards for 1.9 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 430 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Jane Maivia, 25-43 for 306 yards with 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. UCLA run defense has been poor the past 4 weeks, which resulted in losses and missed covers. When Trojans can run, their passing game kicks in. You get big scoring output from them. UCLA has been held to 14 points or fewer in 3 of their 4 road Big Ten games. We'll take USC minus 21.5. SMU in California going off here on Saturday. SMU now 8-3 after a 38-6 home victory against Louisville. The Mustangs had good passing performance and rushed for 178 yards for 4.9 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Cardinals through the air and allowed 128 yards rushing for 4.4 yards per carry. Kevin Jennings in the game, 29-37 for 303 yards and 3 touchdowns. Cal fell to 6-5 after a 31-10 road defeat to Stanford. The Golden Bears rushed for 12 yards and were inefficient in the passing game. They allowed 6.2 yards per rush with 159 yards rushing for 4.3 yards a carry. Jerome Kelly in the game, Segapolotele, he goes 33-49 for 269 yards. A win in SMU will play in the AACC title game next week. The Golden Bears fired their coach following the loss. They are 1-2 at home in conference play and struggle to run the football in every game against an FBS team. SMU 2-1 on the road against the ACC. The Mustangs on the road in conference has allowed 272 yards passing. They have run the ball well on the road in ACC competition, but struggle with quarterback accuracy. The Golden Bears at home in conference play averaging 6.9 yards per pass, but surrendering 31 points per game. The Mustangs have held teams to just over 16 points per game on the road here against the ACC. We'll take SMU here minus 13.5. UNLV and Nevada going off here on Saturday. UNLV now 9-2 after their 38-10 home victory against Hawai'i. The Rebels gained 470 yards with effective rushing and throwing the football. On defense, they limited the Warriors on the ground and allowed 163 yards passing for 6.8 yards per pass attempt. And the Calandria here 21-26 for 253 yards and 3 touchdowns. Nevada 3-8 after a 13-7 road win at Wyoming. The Wolfpack struggled in the passing game and rushed for 213 yards for 5.3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 220 yards with really good work against the run and pass. Carter Jones here, 11-17 for 58 yards and a touchdown. With the win, UNLV will be tied with San Diego State for the final Mountain West title berth, but the tiebreaker is broken up pretty much by a computer program. So this means the Rebels must really run up the score and keep points off the board here to help their chances. Nevada 1-2 at home in the Mountain West with the loss to Boise State by 21 and San Diego State by 34. UNLV 2-1 on the road in conference play with wins by 32 at Colorado State and by 14 at Wyoming. The Rebels on the road in conference play put up 35 points per game with 6.1 yards per run and good work in the passing game. Nevada has struggled offensively at home in conference play. The Rebels have covered 4 of 5 on the road. The Wolfpack 1-3-1 the spread at home. We'll take UNLV here minus 7.5. Fresno State and San Jose State. This one for Saturday. We got Fresno State now 7-4 after their 28-17 home defeat to Utah State. The Bulldogs were inefficient through the air and rushed for 178 yards for 6.6 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Aggies through the air and allowed 227 yards rushing for 4.8 yards a carry. E.J. Warner in the game, 23 of 33. He goes for 187 yards with a touchdown and a pick. San Jose State sits at 3-8 with their 25-3 road defeat at San Jose State. The Spartans gained 268 yards with poor work in the run and pass. They held the Aztecs at 81 passing yards with 167 yards rushing for 3.8 yards per carry. Tom Amasone, 15-27 for 140 yards with an interception. He rushed for 75 yards. Amasone appears will get the start for an injured Walter Eget. The Spartans have lost and failed to cover 5 of 6 with struggles getting points on the scoreboard. Their passing game has been poor in the past 2 games. Fresno State on the road is defending the pass well. We'll take Fresno State here minus 3.5. Notre Dame and Stanford going off here on Saturday. Notre Dame now 9-2 with their 70-7 home victory against Syracuse. The Fighting Irish were limited through the air and rushed for 329 yards for 13.7 yards per carry. On defense, they held the Orange to 207 yards with good work in the run and passing game. C.J. Carr here 5 of 9 for 49 yards and a touchdown. Stanford now 4-7 with their 31-10 home victory against California. The Cardinals were limited through the air and rushed for 159 yards for 4.3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 297 yards with really good work against the run and pass. Elijah Brown here, 10 of 20 for 123 yards with a touchdown. Stanford 4-1 at home. The Fighting Irish has won 9 straight with 6 covers. Their run and pass defense has been really good in the past 7 games. Notre Dame on the road rushing for 4.8 yards a carry with 291 yards passing for 9.7 yards per pass attempt. Their defense has shut down the run and pass. Stanford has been able to move the football through the air, but at home on defense, allowing 341 yards passing per game. Fighting Irish 7-4 to the over as road favorite. We'll take Notre Dame and Stanford over 49.5. Wyoming and Hawai'i going off on Saturday. Wyoming now 4-7 after their 13-7 home defeat to Nevada. The Cowboys gained 220 yards with poor work in the run and pass. On defense, they held the Wolfpack to 58 yards passing with 213 rushing for 5.3 yards a carry. Caden Anderson here, 22 of 39 for 157 yards with a touchdown. Hawai'i drops to 7-4 with a 38-10 road defeat at UNLV. The Warriors were limited through the air and rushed for 68 yards for 2.6 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 470 yards with poor work against the run and pass. Mike Alejado, 15-24 for 163 yards with a touchdown and pick. Hawai'i 2-1 at home in the Mountain West. Wyoming 0-3 on the road in conference play. They have lost and failed to cover 3 straight as they've been held to 7 or fewer points. Hawai'i at home in Mountain West Conference play, throwing for 296 yards per game and putting up 34 points per game, plus outscoring opponents by 16 points a game. The Warriors 5-1 of the spread at home. We'll take Hawai'i here minus 7.5. For more free pick videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Lots of free picks on our channel for myself and our team of cappers here at Tony'sPicks.com, making this a great channel to subscribe to. Hit us up with that like, that thumbs up. We greatly appreciate it. And then visit our site, Tony'sPicks.com, for our best bets, our premium plays of there, and check out our top performing cappers and use that promo code TonyT at checkout, which will save you that 15% off. Links in the description to get signed up. That's going to do it for now. I'm Tony T, and we'll talk with you guys later.